what are you currently making calls on Capitol Hill as we speak to really try and get this over the line? You're wanting the HEROES Act, which is more than $3 trillion in terms of spending, but the Republicans can't even agree on the less than $1 trillion they're looking at. But if we're going to get some sort of agreement between Republicans and Democrats, where do they need to focus of that HEROES Act? What is the most important, Derrick?
Well, there are many components that they still have not agreed on. Vote by mail and to ensure we have safe elections. We have not locked in resources for Black banks and minority-serving institutions that we would like an infusion of cash. You have the benefits, the unemployment benefits about to run out. We are looking at the possibility of creating a safety net or economic collapse because so many people are still impacted as a result of this health pandemic.
And so with regards to sort of getting some of these things negotiated, Derrick, I mean, it seems not only is the clock ticking fast, but the fact that at least in the Senate, that the GOP there waited so long to even get the ball rolling here. How much space does that even give you to sort of get some of these provisions into that bill?
Well, many of these things are being discussed. The House acted quickly. They passed the bill, and they've been waiting for several weeks for the Senate to pass something. We have provisions dealing with the George Floyd Act that may end up in this bill. Unfortunately, we're looking at the reality of Washington over the last 3.5 years. Complete gridlock unnecessarily. We need to move something because the American public will be suffering if we don't move anything.
Derrick, I'm curious about specifics within some of those stimulus bills. There's been a lot of discussion that perhaps $600 a week disincentivizes people to go back to work. And so we were talking about this earlier, and there have been some plans floated around about perhaps $200 a week or so. What are you hearing, though, would be the impact if it were, let's say, $200 a week versus $600 a week on the people that you speak to every day? What are they saying about what is or is not enough during this time when, frankly, a lot of people still don't have their jobs back?
Well, we look at it from this perspective. The more money in people's pocket, the more money spent on our economy to help stimulate and sustain the economy. If we want to nitpick whether it's 200 or 600 out of a $3 trillion package, I think we're missing the mark. We need currency in the economy to keep it going. You get currency in the economy by putting money in people's pockets, individuals' pockets, and that's how you can continue the economy to move forward.
Also, small businesses' pocket as well. And Derrick, I'm interested by how Black-owned businesses are currently faring in this scenario. There was so much action, assertive action, it felt, suddenly people being raised to be aware of which businesses were Black-owned, how they can support them in some way. But that fervor potentially is dissipated on social media. Is it dissipating in terms of the money that's flowing into Black-owned businesses, and what support is needed there?
Well, when you look at African-American small businesses, it was the fastest growing segment of any small business over the last 10 years. This health pandemic has had a substantial impact on small businesses, particularly African-American businesses. So whatever support can be provided is going to be critical for the survival of those businesses. But we also need to look at small business as being created in this current environment. And how do we continue to stimulate that part of the economy? This nation is driven by small businesses. This nation is driven by consumers. And we need to do more by putting money into small businesses' hands, putting more money into individual pockets so that the flow of money continue to support the economy writ large.
And with regards to your role in that, Derrick, and the role of the NAACP, an organization obviously designed specifically to help Black Americans here in this country, how do you, in your role, facilitate more of that sort of economic progress and really more of that investment in Black-owned enterprises or simply just any sort of enterprises that Black people touch?
But three things. One, we are in full support of Robert Smith's 2% plan. I think it is a smart plan. It's a way to put more money into communities that can generate activity. Secondly, we need to put more money into African-American financial service institutions, whether it's the Black banks, the 21 that still exist, credit unions that are ran by African-Americans and focus on African-American communities, and loan funds, so that there is the access to capital necessary for businesses to transition or be agile in this moment. And then thirdly, making sure everyday Americans, particularly African Americans, have an opportunity. The student loan crisis is upon us. And we need to make sure, one, there's a forbearance that's in place, but the money for that forbearance, believe it, is going back into the economy. But secondly, for critical, essential workers who are buried with student loans, we need to look at how do we discharge those student loans, or how do we discharge the interest on those student loans. Can you imagine a teacher in this moment? If you discharge that student loans, that's $300 to $600 a month that will go back into the economy, either through home purchases, vehicle purchases, and other large purchases. Let's stimulate the economy by empowering that middle-income American, African-American, who are government workers, nonprofit workers, who can really help move the economy.
Derrick, you hit on something in the first part of that answer that I've been hearing a lot anecdotally as I speak with some state and local government leaders. They say that with the PPP example, a lot of Black people had a hard time qualifying for PPP because they didn't have the traditional banking relationship, so couldn't get the loans that they really needed within that first stimulus act. Something we've been talking a lot about on this program is how to make sure some of the changes that we're seeing right now really become permanent. How do you talk to some of the members within your constituency? What are they saying about trying to make sure that Black banks are more well-funded and to make sure that they can get permanent banking relationships so that when there are hard times, they have that traditional banking relationship, can get the loans that they need, whereas, perhaps in March they weren't able to?
Well, that goes to access to capital. If African-American banks had more capital to lend, they are best positioned to hit the very community of small Black businesses. Unfortunately, the margins are too slim. And it costs nothing for major corporations to take 2% of their capital and put it in a depository of a Black bank. It's the same insured bank. It provides more capital where the need is most, and it actually open up markets that currently are closed because of the lack of access to capital.
It worries me, Derrick, that a lot of the things you speak to about empowering people with money in their pockets, that is certainly a short-term fix, but it doesn't sort of hit the longer-term inequality divide that we talk of. And about that, because it feeds into those who already own the methods of production out there at the moment. It already feeds in to potentially accentuating the inequality as people spend the checks and put it back into buying a car that the car company happens to be owned by someone who is not of color. So what within the fiscal stimulus would you like to see that starts to ensure that the inequality we've seen in the longer term starts to reduce itself? Is it more about the focus on the small businesses, more about the ability to build wealth, build business?
It's not either or, it's both and, right? For individuals to be able to qualify for a home, to upgrade a home, to build equity in your home, that is about wealth creation. The number one driver of wealth in this country have always been through home ownership. And the more disposable capital individuals have, the better position they are to buy a piece of real estate, which is very important. In addition to making sure there's access to capital for business individuals. Now, if you put those two things together, you have many potential entrepreneurs who are locked out. Not only do they not have access to capital, they are still buried in student loan debt. They're still buried in other debt, and you free them up by giving them more capital so they can participate in the market economy.
Derrick, only a little bit of time left. I want to get a little bit more of a broader take on what you're doing here. A couple of weeks ago, or a week and a half ago, there was that announcement that the NAACP was going to be working with CBS on new content. And I'm a little curious as to what the conversation was that you had with George Cheeks over there, the main executive who you're partnering with here, about what the intended purpose of this is and what you hope to accomplish with it.
Well, for the NAACP, the second major advocacy campaign we established when we were created 111 years ago was advocating against a release of a movie called Birth of a Nation, because we understood how we are projected on the big screen or television screen. Oftentimes it's how people treat us in the streets. And what we wanted to do is to expand our operation in Hollywood, in Los Angeles, where we currently have an office, to go into content creation. There are so many rich stories that have never been told that's reflective of a very dynamic community that I'm a part of, the African-American community. It's unfortunate that last year was the first time ever there was a movie about Harriet Tubman, someone who most of us in the African-American community learned about growing up. And when they first talked about casting the lead role, it was going to be Julia Roberts as Harriet Tubman. That's not acceptable. because there are so many rich stories that should be told that have not been told, and that will be the goal of our relationship with CBS Studios.